Well, hey everybody, hope you're having a good Tuesday so far and maybe getting out to enjoy the beautiful weather. I'm actually sitting in the shade today because it's a little too warm for me in the sun, which I know some of you love the heat more than I do, but I hope you're able to have a good day. Today is what will I think be the second last of our video devotionals on the life of Joseph. We'll see after we finish this whether we keep these weekly Tuesday devotionals going or whether we decide to take a break here now that it's summertime. But for this morning, we're going to be covering Genesis chapter 41. Now, Genesis 41 is a bit of an interesting chapter in Joseph's life as it shows his transition from being a prisoner at the start of the passage to being in the palace in a position of power, and that's my fancy alliteration, a whole bunch of P's there, but in a position of power in the palace of Pharaoh. And we're going to see how this all happens, and again, we're going to see God's hand at work behind the scenes. And so, as Genesis chapter 41 opens up, we see Pharaoh having a couple of dreams. Now, last time we talked about Joseph's ability to interpret dreams, as we saw in the prison with the butler and the baker. But here in Genesis chapter 41, we're going to see that ability that God has given Joseph and that way that God works through Joseph come through in a big way. Because Pharaoh has a couple of dreams, and they both involve 7 healthy things and 7 sick things. And the 7 sick things eat the 7 healthy things, and Pharaoh wakes up and he is understandably very confused as to what did these 2 dreams mean, and the fact that there's 2 of them, that must mean that they're important. And so he's tracks down all sorts of different people to try and get somebody to explain to him what on earth these 2 dreams mean, and nobody can tell him what they mean. All of a sudden, Pharaoh's butler, it's like a light bulb goes on his head, and he thinks, Joseph. And so he confesses to Pharaoh that, there's this guy who interpreted a dream for me when he threw me in prison. He told me exactly what was going to happen, and it happened just like he said it would. And so he's trustworthy. And he said, if you call for him, he's going to be able to tell you what this dream means. And so Pharaoh at this point is willing to try just about anything. And so he calls Joseph out of the prison. And it's kind of funny because Joseph has to shave and he has to change his clothes, make himself presentable. He comes before Pharaoh. Pharaoh tells him what the dream was, and Joseph interprets it and tells him that, God is telling you what's going to happen here over the next while. And the seven fat things, the cows and the heads of wheat, are 7 years of plenty. And so Egypt is going to go through 7 years of just extreme blessing, and there's going to be lots of food and everything's going to be good. But then after that, there's going to be 7 years of famine. And so as Joseph interprets the dream, he then shifts into, suggestion mode, you could say, and suggests to Pharaoh that it'd be a good idea to put somebody in charge here for the next 14 years, basically, the first 7 years, to build up a stockpile of food so that when the years of famine hit, the people of Egypt and possibly even, the people in the nations around them will have access to food in this time. And Pharaoh believes him. Pharaoh likes the idea, and Pharaoh also sees in Joseph someone who is obviously filled with the Spirit of God and trustworthy enough to take over this responsibility. So in the course of a dream and in the course of a few minutes of interpretation, Joseph goes from a prisoner who doesn't know exactly what his life is going to look like to someone who is raised up to a position of power within Pharaoh's palace, eventually getting to the place where he's second in command only to Pharaoh himself. And his job is to make sure that there is going to be food for those 7 years of famine when they come. And so we see him given a chariot. We see him, there's people who are calling out before him, bow the knee when this guy's going to come past. And it's all due to God's blessing in Joseph's life, but also, this ability God had given him to interpret this dream and put him in a position where he likely never thought he would ever be, especially in that initial, trip to Egypt with those slave traders that his brothers sold him to. And so the chapter ends with Joseph kind of on a high here. He gets married, he has a couple of kids, and even as he names these kids, we see a reflection of Joseph's heart and that he's still trusting God in the midst of this. And he still recognizes that he is in the place that he's in, not because of his own ability, but because of God working through him. God was the one who gave him the ability to interpret those dreams. He told that to Pharaoh. He told that to the guys in the prison as well. He understands where this ability has come from, and he's willing to give God the credit for that. And as he names his kids, you see a reflection of Joseph's trust in God working. His first kid is named Manasseh, and that name sort of brings the idea that God has helped him forget the hurt that he suffered at home and helped him move past that. And then the second son is named Ephraim, and that has the idea of being fruitful in this land that really should not have brought him fruitfulness, and yet God did nonetheless. And I think for our application today, that's really where I want to be, where I want to park on for a few minutes or a few moments is just that recognition that Joseph has, that even though his life has thrown him so many things that he could not possibly have expected or chosen or anything like that, he's able to recognize God's hand in the midst of it. And it's interesting, as you look back, you see that if he hadn't been sold into Egypt, he would have never ended up in Potiphar's house. And had he never ended up in Potiphar's house, he would have never ended up in prison. And had he not ended up in prison, he wouldn't have met the chief butler. And had he not met the chief butler, and had the chief butler not forgotten about him for the course of 2 years that he did, which you see right at the end of, or at the start of Genesis 41, maybe Joseph wouldn't have appeared before Pharaoh at just the right time to interpret this dream, to be placed in this position of power. And so we're able to look back as we see the story sort of unfolding. We're able to see there's a plan in this, there's a purpose in this, there's a reason for these things that are happening in Joseph's life. And we're going to see that come, to a full circle, and we're going to see how this applies to the grand story of the Bible and God's redemptive plan through Israel. We're going to get into that in the weeks to come as we see Joseph's family re-enter the picture in the chapters to come. But for today, I think I just want you to understand and to see Joseph's ongoing trust and faith in God, his recognition and his willingness to recognize that he is successful because God is the one who's giving him this success. So that is just something that is a constant refrain in Joseph's life as we see it. And so just a few things for you to consider. Read through Genesis chapter 41. I gave a really quick summary. There's like 53 or 54 verses in there. So give it a read and see if there's other things that stand out to you in there. But I hope you have a great Tuesday, and we will talk to you again soon.